The fictitious character was created in 1933 in Detroit, Michigan by George Trendle and a man by the name of Fran Stryker. The story goes like this. 5 men riding in Texas. They're ambushed. 2 are brothers. 1 is half dead. A traveler comes along, nurses the one brother back to health. The ranger, the brother is Captain Dan Reed, the brother's John Reed. And he decides, these were Texas Rangers, so what happened, he cuts part of the vest of his brother and he makes a mask. Of course, we know the person that came along and nursed him was an Indian. His name was Tonto. And they find a silver mine, and that's where you get the story about the silver bullets. And that's where the Lone Ranger made his bullets. Of course, they're in the hills, and then they find silver, and along with silver, there's Scout. So the legend of the Lone Ranger starts in 1933. Now, born in 1838, is a slave in Crawford County, Arkansas. And of course, slaves always took the last name of the master. The master's name was Reeves, and the young man's name was Bass Reeves. Now, when the Civil War started, Mr. Reeves was a colonel in the Confederate Army, and usually they would take the manservant along with him. So he took Bass Reeves with him. And supposedly there's 2 stories to this. One, that Bass Reeves ran away. The other story is he and his master were playing cards and they got into a dispute and Bass Reeves beat him up. Well, you know what happens after that. So Bass Reeves left and he went into what is known as the Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma, what they call the Oklahoma Territory. And what he does is he learns from the 5 civilized tribes in Oklahoma. They teach him how to track. They teach him how to disguise himself. And they're teaching him all these things. Well, when the emancipation came about, Bass Reeves was able to go back to Arkansas because the blacks were free according to the Emancipation Proclamation. So Bass Reeves, learning all the techniques that he learned from the Indians, and during that time they had corrupt officials in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So President Ulysses S. Grant got rid of those people, and he brought in a man by the name of Isaac Parker, Judge Parker. Now, Judge Parker is known as the hanging judge. And you've probably seen his name in some of the movies, Clint Eastwood, Hang 'em High, Rooster Cogburn. That's the judge that they're talking about. So what they needed was, he brings in James Fagan as the chief U.S. Marshal. He says, you need to hire 200 marshals. Because what was happening is the desperados that were doing murder, robbing, stealing, pilfering, they would hide in the Oklahoma Territory. So they said, okay, we got to have some people that know how to go in there and get these guys. So Fagan had heard about Bass Reeves. Now you have to understand something. This man is 6'2", 200 pounds. That's a big man back in the 1800s. So they offer him a job as a U.S. Marshal. He is the first black U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi. Now, U.S. Marshals do not make a lot of money. They got 6 cents a mile, and if they brought anybody back dead, they had to pay for the funeral. So Isaac Parker said, this will clean out the riffraff so that we don't have people coming to be U.S. Marshals and just killing people. Now, Bass Reeves always spit shined his shoes. He carried 2 guns reversed. Remind you of someone in 1933 carried 2 guns, except his was straight. Now, Bass Reeves was so good, he was ambidextrous. He could shoot left-handed or right-handed. Now you have to understand something, people. Hollywood dictates gun battles in the street. That really didn't happen. There was only one documented, possibly it was Wild Bill Hickok, and he killed Tut because Tut had won his watch, and he told Tut don't wear the watch, and Tut did. And Wild Bill Hickok shot him at 75 yards through the heart, but Tut had fired 4 or 5 shots and missed Wild Bill Hickok. So I just want to get you to understand that. The word gunslinger didn't come into existence until 1925 when Zane Grey put it in one of his books. So you need to understand that. Now, Bass Reeves, he was so good, he spoke 7 Indian languages. But here's the killing part. He could not read or write because it was against the law to teach slaves to read. So people would say, well, how do you know if we give you the warrants, how are you going to know? So what he would do is he would have the people read the names, and then he would put them in order because he had a photographic memory and he knew which one, and he never arrested the wrong person. Now, those of you that are my age and older remember that the Lone Ranger used to dress up and disguise himself when he went to town. Bass Reeves learned that from the Indians. Now, being 6'2", they taught him how to make himself shorter. How good was this man? Confirmed. He killed 14 men. He captured 3,000 felons. One time he went out, he captured 19 and brought them in. Now, this is not me, this is confirmed. This man he was inducted into the Cowboy Hall of Fame in 1992. He's in the Black Hall of Fame of Arkansas. Bass Reeves is known in the top 10 as a badass, and that's the terminology that they use. He was a badass. One time, he walked 28 miles to capture 2 brothers. And the reason he did the 28 miles, he wanted to look scruffy. So when he got to the door, the boy's mother came to the door, and he said, "Can you help me out? I'm running from the law." And she said, well, my boys are outlaws too. Maybe you guys can hook up. So what Bass Reeves did, he went in, the boys came, he was sleeping on the floor, but he had his shackles and everything on him. So in the middle of the night, he shackled them and told them that they were under arrest, and their mother was beating him over the head with a pan because she was angry. One time, Bass Reeves dressed as a female to capture a criminal. Now, one of the worst criminals that Bass Reeves got was a man by the name of Bob Dozier. Dozier was a murderer, a swindler, a bank robber, and he would torture people to get information, like take hot pokers and stick them in them to get the information that he needed. So Bass Reeves is tracking him, and it's raining, and Bass Reeves is looking at the lightning. As the lightning strikes, he sees the shadow goes. But anyway, Dozier shot. Bass Reeves fell down like he was hit, and he waited until Dozier came up on him, and then Dozier was laughing and saying, yeah, I got the end. And next thing you know, Dozier was dead. Bass Reeves killed him. Now, the reason I told you the story of Kendall and Stryker was where they got the story about making up the Lone Ranger was from the prisoners that had spread this information about Bass Reeves up in Detroit. And they heard that. Now, you know they're not going to put a black man on radio in 1933. It's just not going to happen. So they created the Lone Ranger. Bass Reeves did the same thing that the Lone Ranger did. He dressed up in garb to catch prisoners. How many of you remember at the end of you saw the Lone Ranger, he gave somebody a silver bullet. And they say, who is that masked man? And they say, that was the Lone Ranger. Well, Bass Reeves gave out silver dollars. Bass Reeves died in 1910, and he's buried in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Again, he is in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. There is so much about this man, it is unbelievable. He was in law enforcement for 32 years. And when he died, they had news about it in Washington, D.C., Tombstone, they wrote about him. Everyone wrote about this man. Now, the Oklahoma Society apologized to a lot of people because they hid the information or threw it away about the blacks that were U.S. Marshals. And a lot of this comes from Bass Reeves' family. And Bass Reeves had a great nephew that became the first black to be appointed as a federal judge. So I say to you, who is the real Lone Ranger? Thank you.
Thank you. One more time, Mr. Ken. Give it up for him, huh?